Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am back with my video for the 73rd Tony Awards nominations. The 73rd Tony Awards are, of course, honoring the best of Broadway for the 2018-2019 theater season, and they will be taking place this Sunday, June 9th, and will be hosted by James Corden. Now, the Tony Awards are always interesting for me because they're the one award show where I can't personally comment on who I think is the truly deserving winner because I have not seen any of these shows. Because to see a Broadway show, you have to go to New York City, where the theaters that play these shows are located. Now, sometimes they do film performances of certain shows to be put on streaming sites like Broadway HD, or sometimes even screen in movie theaters, but that only happens every once in a while, and not every show obviously does this. So the only way to truly see these shows is to actually go down to New York City, and obviously I cannot afford to do that constantly. I live in the state of New York, but I live far away from New York City. I'd have to take either a plane or train to get down there, because by car I'd probably be about a good 7 or 8 hours at least. So what I'm going to do, like I usually do in my Tony nomination videos, is I'm going to go through all the nominations and then comment basically on what theater media has said about these shows. What shows have gotten critical praise, what shows have gotten critical meh or critical backlash, as well as what shows have been kind of successful and not so successful at the box office, and just things that the theater media is saying is a snub or a surprise in the nominations. So I'm not necessarily going to be injecting my own personal opinion in here, but I'll be talking about just the news regarding these shows. So without further ado, here are the nominations for the 73rd Tony Awards. Best Costume Design of a Play: Toni Leslie James, Bernhardt Hamlet; Rob Howell, The Ferryman; Ann Roth, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus; Ann Roth, To Kill a Mockingbird; Clint Ramos, Torch Song. Best Costume Design of a Musical: Paul Tazwell, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations; William Ivey Long, Beetlejuice; Bob Mackie, The Cher Show; Michael Crass, Hadestown; William Ivey Long, Tootsie. Best Lighting Design of a Play: Peter Mumford, The Ferryman; Jules Fisher and Peggy Eisenhower, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus; Neil Austin, Inc.; Jan Bersweveld and Tal Yarden, Network; Jennifer Tipton, To Kill a Mockingbird. Best Lighting Design of a Musical: Howell Binkley, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations; Kenneth Posner and Peter Negrini, Beetlejuice; Kevin Adams, The Cher Show; Bradley King, Hadestown; Peter Mumford, King Kong. Best Scenic Design of a Play: Rob Howell, The Ferryman; Santo Loquasto, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus; Bunny Christie, Inc.; Jan Bersweveld, Network; Miriam Buther, To Kill a Mockingbird. Best Scenic Design of a Musical: Robert Brill and Peter Negrini, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations; David Korins, Beetlejuice; Rachel Hawke, Hadestown; Peter Englund, King Kong; Laura Jelinek, Oklahoma. Best Sound Design of a Play: Fitz Patton, Choir Boy; Nick Powell, The Ferryman; Adam Cork, Inc.; Eric Slycum, Network; Scott Lehrer, To Kill a Mockingbird. Best Sound Design of a Musical: Steve Canyon Kennedy, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations; Peter Hylenski, Beetlejuice; Nevin Steinberg and Jessica Paz, Hadestown; Peter Hylenski, King Kong; Drew Levy, Oklahoma. Best Book of a Musical: Dominique Morisseau, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations; Scott Brown and Anthony King, Beetlejuice. Anais Mitchell, Hadestown. Bob Martin and Chad Begelin, The Prom. Robert Horn, Tootsie. Best Choreography, Sergio Trujillo, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Camille A. Brown, Choir Boy. David Newman, Hadestown. Warren Carlyle, Kiss Me Kate. Dennis Jones, Tootsie. Best Orchestrations, Harold Wheeler, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Michael Chorney and Todd Sickafoose, Hadestown. Larry Hockman, Kiss Me Kate. Daniel Kluger, Oklahoma. Simon Hale, Tootsie. Best Original Score, Music and/or Lyrics written for the theater. Be More Chill, Music and Lyrics by Joe Iconis. Beetlejuice, Music and Lyrics by Eddie Perfect. Hadestown, Music and Lyrics by Anais Mitchell. The Prom, Music by Matthew Sklar, Lyrics by Chad Benjamin. To Kill a Mockingbird, Music by Adam Gittell. Tootsie, Music and Lyrics by David Yazbek. Best Featured Actor in a Play, Bertie Carvel, Inc. Robin De Jesus, The Boys in the Band. Gideon Glick, To Kill a Mockingbird. Brandon Uranowitz, Burn This. Benjamin Walker, All My Sons. Best Featured Actress in a Play, Fionnuala Flanagan, The Ferryman. Celia Keenan Bolger, To Kill a Mockingbird. Christine Nielsen, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus. Julie White, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus. Ruth Wilson, King Lear. Best Featured Actor in a Musical, Andre DeShields, Hadestown. Andy Grodelushian, Tootsie. Patrick Page, Hadestown. Jeremy Pope, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Ephraim Sykes, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Best Featured Actress in a Musical, Lily Cooper, Tootsie. Amber Gray, Hadestown. Sarah Stiles, Tootsie. Ali Stroker, Oklahoma. Mary Testa, Oklahoma. Best Actor in a Play, Paddy Considine, The Ferryman. Bryan Cranston, Network. Jeff Daniels, To Kill a Mockingbird. Adam Driver, Burn This. Jeremy Pope, Choir Boy. Best Actress in a Play, Annette Bening, All My Sons. Laura Donnelly, The Ferryman. Elaine May, The Waverly Gallery. Janet McTeer, Bernhardt Hamlet. Laurie Metcalf, Hillary and Clinton. Heidi Schreck, What the Constitution Means to Me. Best Actor in a Musical, Brooks Ashmanskas, The Prom. Derek Baskin, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Alex Brightman, Beetlejuice. Damon Dono, Oklahoma. Santino Fontana, Tootsie. Best Actress in a Musical, Stephanie J. Block, The Cher Show. Caitlin Kinnunen, The Prom. Beth Level, The Prom. Eva Noblezada, Hadestown. Kelly O'Hara, Kiss Me Kate. Best Director of a Play, Sam Mendes, The Ferryman. George C. Wolfe, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus. Rupert Gould, Inc. Ivo Van Hove, Network. Bartlett Sher, To Kill a Mockingbird. Best Director of a Musical, Des McAnuff, Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Rachel Chavkin, Hadestown. Daniel Fish, Oklahoma. Casey Nicholaw, The Prom. Scott Ellis, Tootsie. Best Revival of a Play, All My Sons. The Boys in the Band. Burn This. Torch Song, The Waverly Gallery. Best Revival of a Musical, Kiss Me Kate, Oklahoma. Best Play: Choir Boy by Terrell Alvin McCraney, The Ferryman by Jez Butterworth, Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus by Taylor Mack, Ink by James Graham, What the Constitution Means to Me by Heidi Schreck, and finally, Best Musical: Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations, Beetlejuice, Hadestown, The Prom, Tootsie. And those are the nominations for the 73rd Tony Awards. So this is all the buzz I've been hearing so far. On the play side, I've heard nothing but fantastic things about The Ferryman. It was on pretty much every critic's best of 2018 list. Just got tons of rave reviews, and I hear it's an amazing experience to behold on stage. I mean, it's got a large cast, and they even include live animals, and they even include babies, because in most stage shows, whenever there's a character that's a baby, the actors and actresses are usually just carrying around a doll on stage, because with a live baby, you never know how they're going to react. Will they cry on stage? Will they cooperate? But here they actually do use live babies, and I hear it works pretty well. So according to all the theater news sites, it's no surprise that The Ferryman is dominating here, and there's many who think it's going to win tons of awards. And then, of course, you have To Kill a Mockingbird, which had quite a bit of a troubled history leading up to the stage, because, for one thing, there already is a stage adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, written by Christopher Sergel, which is often performed in regional theaters, and I myself have seen a regional theater production of To Kill a Mockingbird, which was just fantastic. But this new version is written by Aaron Sorkin, the same guy who created The West Wing and won an Oscar for writing The Social Network, and who's written several plays himself, like A Few Good Men, which then became the famous film starring Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. But he wrote another stage adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, and actually ended up getting sued by Harper Lee's estate. Harper Lee, of course, wrote the original novel because apparently he made too many changes that they didn't like. And I've heard it's relatively faithful to the novel with some tweaks here and there. Probably the most notable difference is that the children, while still technically children in the story, are actually played by adults and not children because of the lengthy dialogue, is what they said. But in the regional production I saw, actual children were used to play Scout, Jem, and Dill. But eventually the lawsuit was resolved, the play ended up opening, and it did get great reviews, and it's now officially the highest grossing American play of all time. But it also has run into some problems, namely the fact that the show's producer, Scott Rudin, kind of took a monopoly on the To Kill a Mockingbird by forcing all regional theaters to cancel their production of the Christopher Sergel version by saying, oh, we hold exclusive stage copyright claims now, so you can only use our version. And To Kill a Mockingbird, while it got many nominations, it didn't get a Best Play nomination. And there have been some who are wondering, are the Tony voters trying to punish Scott Rudin for wanting to do this kind of monopolization? Although it should be noted, Scott Rudin pretty much produced every play on Broadway this season, both original and revival, so he already technically is nominated multiple times this year. But then again, it should be noted, Broadway isn't always a big fan of taking classic novels and adapting them to the stage, because they don't always get the highest honors because they feel that the original source material is far better. And it's not just plays, but also movies as well, because you have a stage adaptation of the iconic film Network. And while that got some nominations, it obviously didn't get a Best Play nomination. However, it should be noted that while To Kill a Mockingbird did receive pretty much universal critical acclaim, Network's critical acclaim was more mixed at best. There was universal praise for Bryan Cranston's performance, but the other elements of the show got kind of a meh reception. So even though To Kill a Mockingbird did get snubbed from the top category to many people's surprise, it's not like it needs the Tony to succeed on Broadway, because like I just said, It's already the highest grossing American play in Broadway history. It's probably going to run on Broadway for years at this point, which is rare for a play, because it's usually the musicals that run for a long time. I don't think it's going to run as long as like the Phantom of the Opera or Wicked, but probably a couple years at least. And of course, it's also going to have a national tour, so it already has made its success. And then Gary, a sequel to Titus Andronicus, I've heard is a interesting show, although it's one of those shows that you'll probably either really like or really hate, because it's one of those shows that you'll like or hate depending on your taste, because it's very macabre, it's very dark, it's more or less a black comedy from what I've heard, which is kind of ironic. And like it says in the title, this is a sequel to the play Titus Andronicus by William Shakespeare, which I understand is a tragedy. So it's kind of ironic that this one is like a dark comedy, this sequel. And since it deals with the bloody aftermath of the fall of the Roman Empire, it's not exactly a show that may appeal to a lot of people because of its macabre themes. So if you like that kind of stuff, you probably like this. If you don't like that kind of stuff, then you'll probably hate it. That's what all the press has been saying. And then Ink, I hear, is an interesting look at a young Rupert Murdoch and how he turned the British newspaper The Sun from a struggling newspaper to this big tabloid. And of course, Rupert Murdoch is one of the most controversial media mogul figures of all time. Because he went on to create some pretty controversial organizations like Fox News, and one of his newspapers, the News of the World, ended up being shut down when reporters for that newspaper were found to have committed phone hacking of tons of deceased people, everything from children to 9/11 victims. What the Constitution means to me, even though it only got 2 nominations, they were 2 big ones. And it even got nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. I've heard nothing but great things about that. And then, of course, you have a couple of other smaller plays which only got a few nominations, like Bernhardt Hamlet, which I hear is pretty good, although it closed a while ago, and it's basically a look at the legendary French actress Sarah Bernhardt and how she played Hamlet on stage. And then Hillary and Clinton is basically an alternate reality take on Bill and Hillary Clinton and Hillary's failed attempt to become the 2008 Democrat presidential candidate. And Laurie Metcalf is the only person nominated for the entire show. And most of the time when Laurie Metcalf gets a Tony nomination, she's often the only person from the entire show that gets nominated. She had better luck with A Doll's House and Three Tall Women, where multiple people got nominated beside her. But for most of the time, she always ends up being the sole nominee, and that's the case we have here. But she already has 2 Tonys, which she won back-to-back, so I'm not sure if they're going to give her a 3rd one just now. But she is going to be starring in a revival of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf next year, so maybe she could win her 3rd Tony for that. Oh, and I also forgot to talk about Choir Boy. I heard great things about that. That's the new play by Terrell Alvin McCraney, who won an Oscar for Moonlight for Best Adapted Screenplay, which was based on a play of his. So if he wins a Tony, he'll already be halfway towards the EGOT Club. And then in terms of play revivals, the play revivals didn't really get many category nominations beyond Best Revival of a Play, but I've heard a lot about them. All My Sons, I heard, was pretty good, although the New York Times was particularly harsh towards it, although most other outlets seemed to like it. The Boys in the Band, that was like a huge sellout show because it featured all these big celebrities in the cast, like Jim Parsons, Zachary Quinto, Andrew Rannells, Matt Bomer, and it's also a landmark play as well because it was celebrating its 50th anniversary, and it's one of the most prominent plays about gay characters ever created, and it came out like right before the Stonewall riots, and it had never been on Broadway before, only off-Broadway. But if you missed the chance to see this version of The Boys in the Band, Ryan Murphy is going to be producing a Netflix movie adaptation with all the cast members reprising their roles, which actually happened over 50 years ago as well, when Boys in the Band premiered off-Broadway, a film adaptation was made directed by William Friedkin, who later went on to direct The French Connection and The Exorcist. He ended up having all the cast members from the off-Broadway production reprise their roles in his film version as well, although I've never seen it. Burn This, I heard, was mixed, with a lot of praise being given to Adam Driver, and to Brandon Uranowitz, but less so towards Kerry Russell. Torch Song, I heard, was mostly good, although some critics, I heard, found that the play hadn't aged well and it actually closed early due to poor ticket sales. And then The Waverly Gallery, I heard nothing but great things about. This is a revival of a Kenneth Lonergan play. Kenneth Lonergan, he's a playwright as well as a screenwriter and director. He won an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay for Manchester by the Sea. And there's actually a new Tony rule now where playwrights who either made significant changes to their plays or they're having their play appear on Broadway for the first time after appearing off-Broadway can now actually take home a Tony if the show wins Best Revival. And in the case of The Waverly Gallery, Kenneth Lonergan can take home a Tony if it wins Best Revival of a play, because usually it would only go to the producers. But for the Best Play category, the award goes to both the playwright and the producers, for the new plays, I should mention. But now for Revival, the playwrights can join in on the fun. Then in terms of musicals, Hadestown is considered by many to be like the front runner, and it also has the most nominations. I've heard nothing but great things about it. It's a stage adaptation of Anais Mitchell's 2010 album of the same name. It was one of those concept albums that basically tells the story of the classic Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And yeah, it's basically a stage adaptation of that, and I hear it's quite excellent. And then Tootsie, of course, is based on the 1982 film that starred Dustin Hoffman. I hear they still use the main premise of the film, in which an out-of-work actor who's extremely difficult to work with dresses up as a woman so that he can get just any role that he can get his hands on, even if it is women's roles that he now has to audition for. However, beyond that, I hear the show from that point becomes completely different from the movie. So after the whole dressing and drag thing, instead of focusing on the world of soap operas, it focuses on Broadway, because he goes out for Broadway shows in this version apparently. And given that a lot has changed between 1982 to 2019, some of those things like men dressing up as women to get women's parts, those are addressed more, and they say it actually fits in well with the Me Too movement, which you wouldn't think would be a show like Tootsie would be able to do, especially if you were going to keep it firmly in the 1980s mindset, but they do manage to do it well here, according to reports of people I've heard who've seen the show. So it's one of those shows that's basically not a complete carbon copy of the movie, unlike, say, Pretty Woman, from what I heard, is a carbon copy of the original film, and critics were kind of meh about it as a result, and as a result, Pretty Woman got 0 Tony nominations. Oh, and I should mention that, of course, Tootsie actually did get positive reviews from critics for the most part, and The Prom also got mostly positive reviews as well, although there were some that were kind of more on the fence. The Prom, in this case, is actually a very original musical in which it's not based on a movie or a TV show or a book. It really is, in this case, an original musical that didn't come from anywhere else. And I hear it's an interesting story. It's about these Broadway stars who are like vain and narcissistic, and their show gets closed because of harsh reviews. And then when they hear about this girl in Indiana whose high school has forbidden her from taking her girlfriend to prom, they decide to go help her, but not because they believe in her cause, but rather because they, the actors, want positive publicity for themselves. And then I guess they learn a lesson about taking up a cause for publicity versus taking up a cause because you believe in it. You know, again, that's just what I've heard based on the summary of the show, since I haven't actually seen it, but it's like meant to be one of those character transformation shows of bad people becoming good people. Although I have seen one of the actresses from that show in the only time I did go see a Broadway show. One of the stars of the prom is Beth Leavel, who's one of the nominees for Best Actress in a Musical. And the one time I did go see a Broadway show was when I was in high school. I went with my drama club to see The Drowsy Chaperone, and Beth Leavel plays the titular chaperone, for which she won a Tony Award for that. And she was absolutely fantastic in that show. She was hilarious as hell. Let's see, and then Ain't Too Proud, The Life and Times of the Temptations. Obviously, this is a jukebox musical, and as you can tell from the title, it's about the iconic group The Temptations, who of course are known for songs like My Girl and many, many others. And it's actually been doing quite well for a jukebox musical. It's gotten generally positive reviews from critics. It's been doing very well at the box office. So it's going in the direction of shows like Jersey Boys and Beautiful, the Carole King musical, two other jukebox musicals that got a lot of critical and commercial success, as well as several Tony nominations and wins. Well, the jukebox musicals are always interesting because they provide a lot of nostalgia, but then they often get criticized for that nostalgia not being original enough, because you're just taking what people are already familiar with. Although I don't always think that's a bad thing, and obviously when it's done right, critics will like it. But jukebox musicals are very tricky because, from what I've noticed, when you tend to make a jukebox musical about the actual person whose songs you're using, and you're telling their life story through their music, then it's generally a success. However, when you take an artist's songs and you use it for a completely different story that's not about the artist, but rather an original story, it's often hit or miss, most usually miss. Of course, there's Mamma Mia, which famously uses the songs of ABBA, but that's like the only successful jukebox musical in which the story is not about ABBA, or I guess in any other artist you want, because there was a show earlier this year called Head Over Heels, which, while it did play for a couple months, could probably still be considered a flop because it closed after only a few months and it got no Tony nominations, and that was a medieval musical using the songs of the Go-Go's. And then, of course, there's Beetlejuice. Now, this is probably the most interesting case here because Beetlejuice had a pretty troubled production, not because of like technical snafus or things like that, but it got some pretty harsh reviews upon its premiere in Washington, D.C. And the creators actually took those reviews in stride and actually went back and made several changes to try and make the show better, which you should normally do anyway. But even with those changes, from what I've heard, most critics don't think the show is good enough. But I suppose either the Tony nominators really, really like that show, because there's like a nominating committee of about 50 people every year that pick the nominations, and then all the Tony voters then vote. Or maybe, so either they really liked the show and thought it was underrated, or maybe they just felt that came out so late in the season it was the freshest in their minds, even if it wasn't the best show. Now, I'm obviously not saying if I like the show or not, because I haven't seen it, but it's one of those shows that, I guess if you like movie to stage shows, maybe you'll like it. If you like the movie Beetlejuice, maybe you'll like it. If you don't like any of those things, then you probably won't like it. If you like more original stuff, then you probably won't like it, I hear that for the most part it's like the movie, but they also try to do away with some of the 1980s jokes that might have worked in the 1980s but would be cringeworthy now. And also you have King Kong, which got pretty harsh reviews from critics, and I'm honestly not surprised because I didn't think a King Kong musical could work on Broadway at all, and apparently according to critics it doesn't. But I hear the technical elements are pretty impressive, so I guess they feel, well, you have to acknowledge them. Kind of like what they did with Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, a show which also got trashed by critics, probably one of the worst shows in Broadway history according to critics, but even that still got a few nominations for its designs. And then of course you have musicals that weren't even nominated at all because they were either too generic according to critics, like Pretty Woman, or they were just completely awful, like this show called Getting the Band Back Together, which was not only completely trashed by critics, but was such a bad box office failure that it closed after only like 2 weeks. Now, there are shows that have closed even earlier than that, but 2 weeks is still very, very short, even by Broadway standards. And then with musical revivals, I haven't talked about them much because there were literally only two, Kiss Me Kate and Oklahoma, and therefore, since they were the only two ones, they were both nominated. Although I hear sometimes they can opt to not nominate any if they feel that two is not enough, but in this case they feel it is. And Kiss Me Kate, I've heard mixed things about. Like some of these shows, I heard they changed some of the script to make it more palatable for 2019 audiences in terms of humor, and some critics have said the changes work, others have said it doesn't work. And then Oklahoma, I heard nothing but rave reviews, at least from critics, because Oklahoma, while it keeps all the songs and dialogue intact, from what I've heard, it has completely different staging than what you would expect from a show like Oklahoma. Like, from photos and videos I've seen, the characters all wear modern-day outfits. They, instead of like a traditional orchestra, they have instruments like guitars and banjos, so they make it more like country rather than Broadway in terms of musical styles. And, you know, it's a very bare set with very minimal props. So it's one of those things where critics may like the changes, but audiences are more polarized. Indeed, I've read reports some audiences think the changes were amazing, and others not so much. And basically the reports have always said, beware, this is not your grandmother's version of Oklahoma. And I hear that with this new version of Oklahoma, it brings a lot more dark elements to the surface that are kind of hidden underneath in more traditional stagings of the show. But this is one of those shows where I wish I could go to New York City to see it for myself, just to see how these changes really look in the full context of the show. Alright, well, and that's it from this video, at least from what I can report based on what theater news sites have said about these shows. So, if you have seen any of these actual shows, let me know in the comment section below what you think of them, and what you think of the Tony nominations in general. What do you like, what do you not like, and what do you think got snubbed? And thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. Click the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to get all my new videos as soon as they're uploaded. And I will be back sometime next week with my video about the Tony Award winners and my review of the ceremony. So until then, I will see you guys next time. Bye!